I've talked with hundreds of home coffee roasters from all over the world the last few years. Many of them are new home coffee roasters, some are more advanced, and they're asking some of the same questions that other enthusiasts are asking. And so today I want to share with you the most commonly asked questions to me here on this channel. Thanks for joining me here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. This is what this channel is all about. If you're new to home coffee roasting, I just have been wrapping up an intro series. I would encourage you to check that out, Home Coffee Roasting 101. There'll be a link in the description. And then we're now getting to the point where we're going to be transitioning into 200 level coffee roasting at home video topics. And I'm excited about that because this is going to help you take your coffee roasting hobby to the next level. So look forward to those videos here in the near future. The first question that's so often asked is, do I need an expensive coffee roasting machine to start roasting coffee at home? And the answer, of course, is no, you don't. You can start with a hot air popper or a skillet. Those are things that just about everybody has at home or can get fairly inexpensively. There are others that use do-it-yourself methods, DIY kind of coffee roasting machines. I've had one here on my channel that I did, and it was a bread machine with a heat gun. And the cost was, I think it was under $100 US for the heat gun and the bread machine. It wasn't expensive, and I got some great results from that. I had full control over my roast, and that could be something that someone would use every time they want to roast coffee. And it can roast some larger batches. I was at 300 or 400 grams of coffee. I would encourage you to check that video out. I'll have a link in the description. The next question that's often asked is, how do I know that my coffee has been roasted properly? Well, I think that it starts with some of the core things we've been talking about in this beginner series, and that is understanding the visual cues of what happens to the beans throughout the roasting process. You should be able to see color change throughout the roast. You should be able to smell the changes in the coffee as it's progressing through the roasting stages, and then ultimately hear the coffee crack, and from there, watching the color, know when to drop the coffee. In a real general sense, the visual cues, the auditory, hearing, and the smelling, using our senses, those things are going to help us know that the coffee has been roasted fully, that it's fully developed and roasted, and it's roasted to the level that we want it to be roasted to. So in the simplest sense, I think it's just knowing to use your senses and how to use your senses. And then from there, it's going to be controlling the roaster so that you can control each of those steps along the way. As always, you're going to have trial and error and experience some of these things for yourself. That's part of the learning process, but also taking notes. We'll be talking about the importance of that here in just a couple of minutes, but taking notes so that you can either replicate or you can learn from your mistakes on what you should do on your next roast. The next question often asked is, where do I buy good quality green coffee? And the answer is, you've got to find a source that is reputable, that has good information on the coffee. I've got a video, several videos actually, that talk about buying green coffee. I would encourage you to do that. But I would talk with those in the community about where they buy their coffee. I have in my beginning series here, I've listed several here in the United States that I've ordered from that are good quality greens sellers that have reliably sold me good green coffee. And again, most importantly is being able to read about the coffee for yourself, learning about the farm, what the coffee beans are like, what you can expect them to taste like, maybe farm information. All of those things make a big difference and they vary from seller to seller. So that's going to help you find the right seller, is just finding one that gives good information on their coffee and then also the reputation they have. Storing coffee beans is the next question. What is the best way to store my coffee beans? And I think the most important is we need to keep them in a darker, cool, dry environment. We don't want large temperature swings. That is going to cause moisture. We don't want a lot of air exposing the beans. We want to seal the bags of green coffee to keep moist air or humidity out, or to keep the moisture that's in the beans in. We don't want them to dry out. And so we want our coffee to be sealed in airtight bags, like a Ziploc bag or something to that effect. And from there, that would be stored in some sort of a sealable container, like a plastic tub. And it doesn't necessarily have to be airtight, but you want to keep other things out of the coffee. Following those practices, you should be able to have coffee last for several months without any concern. All right, so now we're moving into some more advanced questions, and these are really important questions. I get these asked so often. How can I replicate my roast over and over? People have challenges. They roast a great roast, and then the next time they go to try to roast it, it doesn't taste the same. They get frustrated. So how can you roast consistently from batch to batch, or from roast to roast, week after week, and have the same results? And number one is you've got to be able to have a roasting profile worksheet. I have free roasting profile worksheets available for you to download on my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll have a link in the description. You should check that out, because as you're roasting coffee, you should write down if you're recording temperatures, write down the temperatures every 30 seconds. Write down your event times on the worksheet, and write down your power settings and your fan settings for every time you make a change on the timeline. And that's all done in the worksheet. And record the weight difference between the green coffee before you roast it and the fully roasted coffee after you've roasted it, and record that weight loss. So that is your measurement of roast level being recorded. You can also save some beans and reference the color of those beans and compare them. And you can also use, if your roaster is recording temperatures, you can also reference the ending temperature to help for consistency as well. The other thing you should do is you should roast the same batch size. You can't change batch sizes from one roast to the next and expect the profile not to change. You're going to run into challenges on that. You're going to have to make changes to your power and your air settings. So you're going to want that. If you change coffees, different types of beans, you're going to end up with a different profile. The coffee is going to behave differently because of different densities and so on, or processes, dry process versus a wash process coffee or an anaerobic. All of those things, you write this down, so then when you get that golden roast that you're really happy with, you've got the recipe, and then you can replicate that over and over. Download the Coffee Roasting Profile Worksheet for free, and the link will be in the description. All right, what temperatures do I use to roast coffee? Well, I'm going to answer that question in a second, but first I want to thank you for being here and encourage you to subscribe to my channel and like this video. That really helps me out. Home coffee roasting is an awesome hobby. There's a wonderful community of people that are involved in this hobby, and we all help each other. And by you doing those things, that helps me out as I support you in your hobby here on my channel. Okay, what temperatures do I use to roast my coffee? That's a question that I get asked so many times. Coffee roasting temperatures from one machine to the next, they're going to present a different temperature to you. My roaster is going to present a different temperature than your roaster will. You have to be familiar with your coffee roasting machine temperatures. You have to roast quite a few roasts when you reach the dry stage, when the coffee has turned yellow, whether you're on an air roaster or a drum roaster. When you reach that point, record that temperature, and then notice that at each point you're roasting coffee and you get to the dry event, look at your temperature and reference that and compare that. And it'll vary maybe 2 or 3 degrees, but it'll be fairly consistent as long as your batch size is consistent and the coffee that you're roasting is the same. When you change coffees, or when you change your batch size, Or when you change your roasting profile, like your starting temperature, it will influence your event times and temperatures. So pay attention to that and compare those, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So Mike, you haven't answered the question. How do I know what temperatures to use? Well, I did sort of answer it, and that is you first need to become familiar with your own temperatures, right? Once you do that, then you need to do that throughout the entire roast. You need to do the same thing with first crack. What are your first crack temperatures? Well, mine are going to be different than yours. We just talked about that a minute ago. So you're going to have to experience that for yourself and record what those temperatures are. Pay attention to that so that as you're roasting, you're going to be able to anticipate how long it's going to take you to get to that temperature at that event. So let's say that you're roasting coffee and you're working through the dry stage. You're trying to get your coffee to turn yellow, and it usually happens around 4 minutes. Well, if you're at 3 minutes and you start to see the coffee paling, lightening in color, and then you're at 3.5 minutes, and the coffee has definitely started to just yellow a little bit, you know, and you can predict that you're on track. But if you are roasting and say the coffee hasn't paled and you're already at 3.5 minutes, you know that you've made some mistakes or that things are different, and you're going to need to make an adjustment or need to make an adjustment the next time. So becoming familiar with your coffee roasting temperatures at and towards certain events is going to help you anticipate when that event is going to take place, and it's going to help you anticipate changes or corrections that need to be made in order to get back on track. All right, and the last question is, if my temperatures are different than your temperatures, what good is sharing a profile? And quite honestly, even with the same roasting machine, the temperatures can be different. The Kaleido, the probes move in and out, and so if my probes are adjusted differently than yours, we're going to have a different result. The probe placement on a machine. This machine here might be different than where the probe is placed and being read on yours. The thickness of the probe, all of those things make a difference. The coffee type that you're roasting, the starting temperature you started with. So what do? How do we share a roast profile? How do you benefit from the profile that I'm sharing with you? Well, if it's a different roaster, you're going to have a little more of a challenge, but it's still feasible. And this is what you do. You're going to use the coffee roasting event times as your plot, as your starting point. We just talked about you being able to predict or determine how long it takes for you to get from one event to the next, right? So there's your answer. If you see a roast profile and somebody has a dry time of 4.5 minutes, let's say, for the dry time, then you'll want to replicate that and control your roaster to reach dry end at 4.5 minutes. Same thing with first crack. First crack happened 3.5 minutes after the dry event. And so you control your roaster temperatures so that at first crack, you'll reach your first crack temperature 3.5 minutes later, and you do the same thing for when you drop the coffee, that will bring you into a very, very similar profile and roast curve. That's how you use that information. That is the best way for you to start. Those are the most common questions that are asked here on my channel that I encounter with people when I talk with people. If you have questions or comments about the things that you saw in my video, I'm looking forward to hearing from you and seeing the questions or the comments that you have. That is the way to get the conversation started. I always reply to all of my questions that are being asked. I really appreciate you being here today. Please be sure to subscribe, and thanks for joining me today. I hope you have a great week roasting. We'll see you next time.